friends, boom, bad, boom, the walls were shaking for Russians. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was attacked. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FABs, CABs, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Kh-555 and Kh-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 have been damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The Ukrainian military hastily attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, ships, and a helicopter were hit. 13 Russian radar stations have been hit. But Russia also claims that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Begol, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write in the comments if you have warm words of support for Ukraine. Roman Begol, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one Il which delivered the missiles. It is reported that in the morning, an Ilyushin Il-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of Ki-101 missiles. And in Engels, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160MS. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is to what extent? Why was your attack so large scale? The attack was with drones, most likely a missile. And that explosion, since it was an explosion, then the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie, was most likely one of our missiles. I wouldn't even rule out the possibility of a long-range Neptune being used in that direction, and naturally the detonation that occurred after the strike. And the powerful and destructive detonation of various missiles, devastating aerial bombs, and even a significant amount of small arms ammunition, all meticulously loaded and securely stored onto the planes as well, creating a widespread impact. Naturally, the planes nearby couldn't have avoided being damaged. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I thought that within a few days, our intelligence, our general staff would confirm it after gathering information from satellites and analyzing the images, that is, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll be able to celebrate again. Maybe in the next stream, we'll confirm it with you for sure.
Roman Nikolaevich, so what could have been hit? The bombers themselves, the cruise missile storage, and the aviation fuel depot. So these elements were the targets for Ukraine's armed forces, our missiles and our drones?
Any strategic bomber base is, just to give you a comprehensive idea, like a truly massive and sprawling city. In addition to the primary airfield itself, a huge and extensive number of critical infrastructure facilities at various operational levels are deeply involved in continuously supporting its complex operations, ranging from vast underground fuel storage tanks meticulously designed to hold many tens of thousands of tons of essential aviation kerosene, to numerous and diverse specialized warehouses storing a wide array of vital supplies and equipment. And SIS, which is especially important, is a special engineering service for preparing missiles. Naturally, there is also a storage facility for aviation bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, not many people mention this, but a few dozen kilometers south of Engels, along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility called Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site, or more precisely, a storage facility for nuclear warheads for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles there belonging to the 12th Main Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically for tactical nuclear weapons. It's just a mere few dozen kilometers, and the resulting mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels. There it would be a truly real, absolutely massive one, and even people in distant Kazakhstan would clearly see it. It's a shame, really. I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I wouldn't want to disappoint them like that. But nevertheless, this is a very serious and significant facility. And to take it out, not just with rockets or even drones, to level it completely, you would undoubtedly need several squadrons of powerful bombers carpet bombing it extensively. But if you were to blow up this crucial underground fuel storage, and I'll repeat, we are talking about tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene specifically used by strategic bombers. One single bomber, the Tu-160, takes on the equivalent of 3 full railway tank cars of this vital kerosene. That's over 150 tons of aviation kerosene loaded up. And the Tu-95 takes 1 entire tank car, which is still a very substantial amount. And that's precisely why, if it were to be completely destroyed, the immense and far-reaching damage that could be inflicted upon this entire crucial operation would undoubtedly be utterly catastrophic for the Russian forces involved. By the way, it was at Engels that we once handed over our two aircraft, both the Tu-160, Tu-95 and Tu-22, as well as our Kh-55 missiles. Back then, hundreds of missiles were handed over by Kuchma. He was the one dealing with all that at the time, at least. And now basically we're going to try to destroy the very same bombers we once handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit, that will become clear in a few days once the satellite images are decoded.
Roman Igorevich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases at military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks, and the area involved also varies. At a minimum, there should definitely be a regiment there. About 1,500 Russian troops should be involved in this process. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Igorevich?
Absolutely, 100%. The thing is, even SAES, that's the engineering and technical service, the special engineering service, of course. There's also the security and defense of the facility itself, the storage of the missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches, after all. There are even certain mechanisms for climate control, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen were definitely knocked out, and the remaining hundreds were certainly damaged by this strike. Believe me, the shockwave hit the SAES facility as well.
Roman Igorevich, right now the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a whole day after the drone attack, and everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, yes, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile, as well as the strikes on oil refineries and bases like the Kavkazskaya station, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
The sanctions of Malyuk and Budanov have now become the sanctions of the entire Ukrainian defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes like the one on Engels, Ukraine's security services and special operations forces were naturally involved, at the very least. Most likely, the Navy was also involved if there was oil there, because a coastal missile system launch platform was at least used. But I think within a day it will become clear. Long, Neptune Long is the same story, meaning it's launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, the Navy is involved in this. The main targets for this type of missile are objects that need to be penetrated. After all, a 150-kilogram warhead is not the same as a 20-kilogram drone, or even 50, whatever they carry. And the warhead, that is to say, a substantial 150-kilogram warhead, can effectively reach its intended target and then detonate, just as we observe now. Supposedly, let's consider for the moment, supposedly they successfully blew up a large warehouse containing various missiles and powerful aerial bombs in the area of Engels. Naturally, such a significant warhead could also be strategically used against other critical targets, for example, to breach their complex detonation systems or at vital pumping stations. This is one of the main tasks right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these representatives, not from our government, are running around with the idea of how to secure Russian hydrocarbons. So, God forbid these strikes are stopped, like they were last year. If last year in May, Maluk and Budanov's operations hadn't been stopped, there wouldn't be any this year, because there would be nothing left to destroy. Everything would have been wiped out last year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's a basic missile, our Neptune or Long or Neptune. It's a basic missile, originally the Kh-35. At one time, it was also produced at our facility with our engines, turbojet engines for this missile, dual-circuit missiles. It was originally an air-to-ship missile. That was its main purpose, meaning it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, and with a good engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now travel over 500 kilometers. So at the very least, it has reached a range of 500 kilometers. I think it could have also been used against Engels, because they practically broke into a warehouse that was closed. These missiles aren't just lying around outside. The warehouse was closed. Since it was broken into, it was most likely a missile that got in, but there's no confirmation yet, and we won't confirm it either for now. This is more of an analytical note.
Roman Nikolaevich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new opportunities does this open up for us? I'd like us to make this clear right now.
Well, the range of the missile, at least the confirmed one, is 500 to 600 kilometers for sure. We saw this with that OSCE incident and maybe now with Engels as well. Engels is about 600 something kilometers away. That's the actual stated range. So what does 500 to 600 kilometers mean? It's basically a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to Tuapse. If you draw that arc, that's the area we can reliably hit with this missile. The stated range is 1,000 kilometers, so you could, for example, put a compass in St. Petersburg and draw a semicircle almost reaching the Caucasus. That would already get close to Kazakhstan in the east, beyond the Volga, at least past Engels and Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. In the south, it would reach the North Caucasus. If the stated range matches the real flight range, technically it's possible. The engine is very good, our own engine which we produce, and it works reliably. The missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour, so it can fly for an hour or an hour and a half without any problem. The main thing is the fuel. How many extra buckets you fill the missile with, that's how far it will go.
So does that mean Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure facilities could be attacked?
Well, definitely they are already under serious targeting, and in order for us to fully carry out the task of securing our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to be able to reach the Urals, and from here to the Urals is 2,000 kilometers, but it probably doesn't make much sense to develop cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, since they've become a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles would be optimal. So for this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel ballistic missiles are needed. I think we'll resolve this issue, if not this time, then next time.
Roman Nikolaevich, there's more good news. The Main Intelligence Directorate has successfully attacked Russian targets in the temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems were hit, as well as naval vessels and a helicopter. 13 Russian radar stations were destroyed, including one L-125, not Niobiy SV, not BSV, and the Mizny BRLS. How do you assess the work of the GUR? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time, and it has now been documented.
Well, this took several months, definitely. This is the work of GUR's naval drones, MAGUR. The Main Directorate of Intelligence and the Security Service have their own drones. Most of them are unmanned boats, and they've turned them into aircraft carriers, both one and the other. Both the MAGUR from the GUR and the SPB from the SBU can now operate almost like aircraft carriers. They can carry and deploy unmanned aerial vehicles, specifically UAVs, as well as unmanned surface and underwater drones. In other words, they can function as a kind of mothership and relay station at the same time. A boat that's several meters long and a certain width can carry a set of, say, unmanned aerial vehicles. Approach the coast of Crimea or some other Russian territory, somewhere closer to Novorossiysk, perhaps even targeting specific naval installations or infrastructure along the coastline. And a few kilometers from the shore, they can launch drones with direct control using the boat itself as a relay. The guys can carry out a combat mission, some kind of indirect combat mission, for example, with those same FPV drones. That is a certain type of drone, a kamikaze drone, takes off and then destroys Russian radar systems, air defense missile systems, or some other military target, depending on the capabilities. Plus, especially the GUR's Magura drones can also carry air-to-sea missiles, meaning they can launch from the water. This is the R-73 air-to-air missile, an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have thousands of them. It has a thermal homing head, and if you lock it on, once the missile acquires the target, it will chase it down. And if there are two missiles on the Magura drones, two missiles, that means they can also destroy aerial targets. Here's confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed. This is for sure, and not just one. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So the GUR operatives have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has entered a field that's not typical for them and has performed quite well there. And the security service of Maliuk, that is the GUR under Budanov's command, and the SBU under Maliuk's command, are now using practically the entire spectrum of strike capabilities. Moreover, they produce these systems at their own facilities, which is very important. These are special services working at their own bases at their own expense. Their budgets are still quite small. They're not the armed forces of Ukraine, not those enormous billions or hundreds of billions in funding, but still they do it at their own expense. They found sponsors most likely and have accomplished these kinds of missions. Well done. There's nothing more to add.
Manya, Before we talk with you about the reliability of information from Russian war correspondents, I'd like you to give a brief primer on the Ukrainian missile system Haram 2. What are its capabilities, its prospects, and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, to understand the process, what is the Haram 2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander. In terms of range, warhead, and control system, we have a missile just like the Iskander. Several decades ago, there was a significant project launched, which was called Subsun. And based on this Subsun project, a solid fuel ballistic missile system was successfully developed for Haram. Naturally, this important project produced tangible results. That is, the work on this project led to concrete outcomes. Now there are Haram 1 and Haram 2 with a range of 300 kilometers. We developed it and sold it along with an audit to the Saudis for Saudi money, by the way, including the technical documentation. But most likely, thanks to the intervention of our partners, we managed to get at least the technical documentation back, maybe some launchers and possibly even some missiles as well. So you could say that Haram 2 is essentially the same as the Iskander. 500 kilometers, Moscow to ups, that's the 500-kilometer range. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, Rubliovka's elite exporters would be better off moving far away from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because, well, the first thunder, well, it really should finally bury Lenin. How much longer does he have to lie there after all? The Kremlin is the first target, and the second is Rubliovka. Or depending on preference, maybe Rubliovka will actually be the first to go.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Roman Legovich, now, of course, this information has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents because Russia is claiming that the Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
Well, to understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border, if you don't count the curves, just the straight border, between Belarus and Askil. That's between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, that's the Sumy, actually the Chernihiv, Sumy and Kharkiv regions, yes, up to Askil. On the Russian side, that's the Bryansk, Kursk and Belgorod regions. So for us, the main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and competent thing to do. We need to change the architecture of the front to open up the northern front. It's already been opened after we started moving toward the Kursk direction, toward Moscow, as some extremely deluded idiots call it, for the main purpose of tying down enemy forces. Several tens of thousands of Russian troops were tied down there, and of course the creation of the so-called security zone, buffer zones, they call it different things. You could call it a security zone. If it's a front line and a mine strip, we need to create such a security zone about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory, a demilitarized area. But the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So, such a buffer zone can be created by advancing not even 30 kilometers, but just 3, 5, or 7 kilometers onto Russian territory, mining not our land, but Russian territory. If you lay down several 100,000 of these mines, they'll be digging them out for 100 years, if they even bother at all. And naturally, with artillery, you can add another 25 kilometers to create a 30-kilometer buffer zone like this. In the Kursk direction, we did it. We accomplished it. The only retreat, as we've already mentioned, was practically catastrophic because the decision to withdraw and redeploy to defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation. So far, it's not deep without an operational breakthrough. It's a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up better defensive positions. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation there. It's what's called the Central Russian upland. The elevation difference is about 50 to 70 meters. Just to give you an idea, between the hills, yes, there are rivers, or rather small streams, and the low points are at about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So these elevation changes, it's best to take control of them, regardless of where they are, whether on our side or the Russian side. If there's an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that's exactly the kind of task that's carried out. Right now in the area of Demidovka, a mission is being carried out in the direction of Belgorod. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating this kind of buffer zone. And the second issue is trying to intercept Russian reserves, which will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw along the border valley and will be transferred to the eastern front. The goal is to prevent them from reaching the Pokrovsk direction. They have about 2 divisions there, which is practically 30,000 Russian troops who could now be redeployed from the Kursk direction to the eastern front, and they will be passing somewhere along, or rather through the Belgorod region. In order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod region. There is a positive trend at the moment, at least, but of course we can't discuss tactical matters even if we knew them, because it's not allowed to disclose tactical information on air. But in reality, I think in about a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
Russia claimed to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region, but the Air Force has already refuted this fake. And as Andriy Demchenko states, the Russians are storming the Sumy region border on quad bikes. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hryhorovich?
Well, they got scared by the information that came out earlier. A few days ago, there was a good video sequence showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian information psychological operations worked correctly in terms of logic and actions. They responded appropriately. Our own information centers, our psychological operations teams should also take this as an example. After all, FSB and KGB officers have been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years, and they had to carry out such an information psychological operation because the appearance of F-16S practically at the line of contact really shook the Russians. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely involving the dropping of certain munitions. Naturally, due to the radio horizon of Russian air defenses, no one could reach it. And this really hit the Russians in that direction. Naturally, they had to counter this information, so they came up with another information psychological operation, claiming they shot down an F-16, and that's why they're pushing this narrative. Believe me, no one shot anything down. Well, I have friends, a good number of friends, who, if anything had actually happened, would have shared the information, and I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The pilots are operating along the entire line of contact, both on F-16S and Mirages. Well, they've already gone out on combat missions, carrying out tasks in those directions where it's possible, based on the density of the enemy's air defenses and our own ability to cover these aircraft. Gods are Russia, so to speak. Go ahead and draw it yourselves first, so I don't have to swear too much. So this so-called God's Russia in Trump's eyes, which Putin has organized. And for what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure there, but the Ukrainian side is doing exactly the same thing, the same damn thing. A psychological information special operation involving the top officials of the state. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? In order to give the Russian population, mainly the Russian population, of course, and also to try to influence Trump and Ukraine, a chance to suppress or paint a different picture of the real events happening on the Kursk land. Holding on to the Kursk land, they claim that no one there is surrounded, that they're holding on. And the retreat? Yes, there was a retreat, a truly belated escape. If, as we said a month and a half ago, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled one. At the defensive lines, it was a rout, but still, those defensive lines are on Russian territory. The difference is, for example, the Sudza River in Kursk region. Well, in the Kursk area, there's a river called Pereplyuka, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. Nearby, further south, the elevation is already around 220 meters. So here, there's at least a 50 to 70 meter difference in elevation. And this is Kursk land, and on these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudza direction have taken up positions, and at the moment, no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, the Russians need to show that they're surrounded there, that everything is lost. The boss, the client is leaving, they're filming him, everything is lost and so on. They're trying to make it look like that, but it's still a long way from being surrounded, and it's just not realistic because these ridges are located along the borderline, and naturally our troops are stationed there. On Kursk land, I don't think we'll be leaving from there. It's a good defensive line. And as for the Russians who are trying to cut off our direction, they've gotten stuck in the Basovka area. That is, yes, that's the Sumy region, Sumy territory. It's just a few kilometers from the borderline, no more than that. They're trying to somehow break through and cut off the supply to this group, and in the information space to somehow increase the pressure. Well, Putin threw in some dirt and accusations, let's put it mildly, at Trump, and now Trump is mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his lack of involvement in that venture they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis, against the Gaza Strip, against Lebanon, against Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their strong statement there, it definitely won't end well for anyone. Most likely, strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, a situation into which Trump has been drawn. Now he has nowhere to go. Witkov pulled him in, and after all, he's our great Israeli-American or American-Israeli. That's why Russian oil refining facilities will be burning at various levels, and while it might not be reported with the same intensity as before, it will still happen, just in a slightly different way. The nuances with, let's say, Ukraine's defense forces, the work of the local underground at various levels, I think that, by the way, this kind of work by our informants could be about as effective as the current efforts of Ukraine's defense forces. Believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians definitely won't stop fighting for their land, for their identity, for the preservation of their territorial integrity. And as for a few million people from Donetsk, Luhansk, or Crimea, well, there's no way you'll be able to turn them around.
Dear audience, please like this video and in the comments, write a few kind words in support of the Ukrainian armed forces. Share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. The well-known analyst Roman Regolyevich, thank you, and as usual, see you next week.
Goodbye.